or not of an extant body of repertoire in archives or private collections. What we found led to more questions than answers, which you'll often know in research that you don't always get the answers you want, but you get more questions. That is, we have collected some scores at this point, but not very many for the effort. But what we found is very interesting and will or may lead to more. The most interesting thing is that the research has led to some sociological questions associated with the teaching or propagation of the art song form written by Black composers associated with Britain. These questions will be considered later in the talk. There were some factors that made the research both interesting and difficult over the past year, the biggest being the COVID-19 pandemic. Because the crisis was worldwide, it limited travel, limited access to archives, and travel to places and sources of material for the research, and perhaps also to individuals who might offer information about these materials. Perhaps the COVID-19 pandemic even focused more attention of individuals on individual and familial survival in countries with less developed healthcare systems or with less effective response to the pandemic as we perceived it. There are cases in which there is still no response from the contacts. Is that because the contact has no association or interest in the question, is away from work because of the pandemic, or simply is no longer here? Though Zoom has created a fatigue in many of its users, it has also offered a huge opportunity to meet people in normal time, who in normal times it would be very difficult to meet. There was one particularly interesting aspect that took us by surprise. The collection of material that would traditionally be undertaken through visitation to archives and libraries and through developing relationships with institutions was curiously different here. The research assistant music and art song in Nigeria and West Africa. He provides an extensive list of vocal music as part of his book, Nigerian Art Music. Many of the composers were writing in the 60s and 70s, and some of them very experimental. Some of the major composers emerging from Nigeria were Fela Sowande, MBE, a composer, organist, broadcaster, and educator. He is considered the father of modern Nigerian art music. He played classical concerts, duetted with Fats Waller, and played organ on recordings for Vera Lynn. He was a well-known organist and included influences from his Yoruba culture in classical pieces. He also wrote orchestral pieces, most importantly the folk symphony and the African suite. He was also instrumental in establishing African studies departments in the universities in the US. And there is a story, I believe, from Omojola's book that says that when he played an organ piece at an Anglican church, he was more interested in how his African constituents responded to the piece than the white European ones, because he wanted to know, I guess, that he rocked them. His songs include 3 songs of contemplation for tenor and piano, Chapel Music, London, 1950, Because of You for voice and piano, 1950, again Chapel Music, and 3 Yoruba songs for voice and piano, 1954, Ibadan. Now, I haven't been able to get hold of any of these pieces because trying to contact people in Nigeria during the crisis has been very difficult, and when there was contact, they weren't able to access the information. And I'll tell you more about that later. Another composer is Ayo Bankole, who wrote a song cycle for bass baritone in 1958. So these are all fitting well within the period that I was working on. He also wrote 3 Yoruba songs for bass and piano in 1959. Now, because I haven't heard these, I'm not sure if they're purely folk songs or if they are art songs, folk songs set as art songs. But for me, it sort of doesn't matter, because in fact, Schubert sets folk songs as art songs. Brahms set folk songs as art songs, as did many other composers. Harry T. Burleigh set spirituals as art songs for the concert stage. So these songs to me would be art songs, even if they are purely folk songs set to piano accompaniment. Another composer